So, good morning, Patrick. How are you today?
Very well, thank you.
Would you like to start perhaps by introducing yourself?
Yes, my name is Patrick Kivahan, and I'm sitting here today because of my involvement in the clinical trial. I'm a patient advocate and a board member with Cancer Trials Ireland. And my interest and involvement in patient advocacy is because I would like to see more clinical trials here in Ireland and for more patients, cancer patients, to be aware and involved in clinical trials.
Amazing, Patrick. Thank you so much. And my name is Orlaith Gavan. I'm the Country Medical Director for Pfizer Ireland. So my role is to lead and coordinate the entire medical function at Pfizer Healthcare Ireland across all categories, not just oncology, across all disease areas. But a huge part of my role at Pfizer would be, working with our global research and development teams and also working with our local clinicians to try and bring in more Pfizer clinical trials into Ireland. So it's great to be here today and to hear your story. So why don't we start with that, and perhaps you could share your story and how it came about that you were actually part of a clinical trial.
Yes, certainly. When I was 48, I was actually planning to train to run for 2 marathons. So I think that's an important piece, because that's how well I felt physically and psychologically that I could commit to 12 months of training, 6 days a week. But in advance of starting the training program, I decided to go for a checkup. And as part of that checkup, I had some blood tests done. And the blood test showed an elevated white cell count. And when that was then looked into, I got a referral to haematology, which gave me a diagnosis of CLL, which is chronic lymphocytic leukemia. So this obviously came as quite a shock, because I felt very healthy. I wasn't sick or ill in any way, wasn't showing any symptoms, and was continuing operating in life as normal. Initially, the prognosis was quite positive. We were going to use chemotherapy, which had proven very, very successful. But unfortunately, I was in a small group where genetically it didn't work. And then arising from that, we were looking at a stem cell transplant. Mm-hmm. Now, while that's a cure and a very positive outcome, it doesn't have a 100% success rate. About 1 in 3 don't survive the process. So at 48 with 2 young children, this was a pretty scary process. Yeah. And a little bit through sort of serendipity, my doctor in Tala had a conversation with a clinician in James's about transferring me over for the transplant process. And the clinician in St. James's mentioned they were about to start a clinical trial and asked would I be interested. And that's how I got introduced to clinical trials. Mm. So that then involved the process of meeting that clinician and then applying to see if I was eligible for the trial. I think that's important for people to know. You can't just gain entry to a trial. You do have to meet the criteria of the drug company. Sure. And I was fortunate I met those criteria. I got on the trial and I got on the active arm, so I received the active medication. I suppose my concern looking back is that there was too much luck and happenstance in that process. I think it would be better if all patients were aware of clinical trials and what's available so that they can consider their options before making a decision about what treatment path to take. Now, fortunately, I got access to the trial, and after 3 years, I gained full remission.
It's fantastic. Yeah. Can we just come back to your experience with chemotherapy? So you mentioned before you were enrolled in the new clinical trial that you actually received chemotherapy. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and how that affected your life?
Yes, initially what was offered was a regime of chemotherapy, which is 3 different types of medication combined. And the information I'd received from my clinician was that this was a very successful therapy. 96% of patients achieved remission, which I was amazed at. I didn't think it was that high. So I was very positive entering into the chemotherapy process because I felt quite confident I could be within that 96%. Now I got a lot of briefing in advance of treatment about the side effects of chemotherapy, which are very, very severe. And so we initially started treatment in December 2011. But after a couple of months, it started to become obvious that I wasn't working because I wasn't suffering the side effects that had been indicated in the literature. So outside of maybe some mild nausea, I wasn't suffering the really bad side effects. My hair didn't fall out, all those other ancillary issues. And that's either was because I had a very strong system that wasn't suffering the side effects, which can happen, or more likely it wasn't having the impact it should do. So we did 4 rounds of chemotherapy. And at the end of that process, we felt we had to do another 2. But at the end of the 6, it had a pretty minor impact in relation to the leukemia itself. On the downside, it had a very severe effect on my immune system. So my immune ratings went down to very, very low readings, what they call, it was a figure of 0.01. So you literally have no immune system. And then it became suspect to a lot of opportunistic infections. So constantly on antibiotics, or even having to become an inpatient to get IV antibiotics. So it's very, very disruptive. Also means that you're very isolated. So the children, even in school, had to avoid me, couldn't hug me or things like that. Tell friends and family that if they were in any way ill, they couldn't come near, because literally a common cold would make me very, very ill. So on top of the fact it didn't work, it also then leaves you very isolated and sort of exposes you to any opportunistic infection you have. So that was the downside. So I'm just curious, why is it important for more patients like me to have access to innovative therapies?
Clinical trials are critical, Patrick, and I'm sure you know this well through living your own journey and your own experience. But really, clinical trials are the cornerstone of evidence-based medicine, and they really further our knowledge. And they're really critical for patients to be able to access innovative and novel new therapies, often before the drug is actually available. And this is particularly critical in areas like oncology or hematology, where unfortunately some patients may have exhausted all available treatment options. So sometimes a clinical trial is really the only opportunity for them. So they're really critical, and it's critical that, in Ireland, we try to secure more innovative and novel clinical trials for Irish patients. I would say that, Ireland has huge capability when it comes to running and conducting clinical trials. We have wonderful clinicians here, world leading, many of whom will have conducted their specialist training in leading, cancer centres across the globe, world-class centres. They come back to Ireland and they really expect and are passionate about clinical trials for their patients. Overall, I would say the infrastructure here is very positive, and we're making continuous improvements in that regard. And what's really encouraging is recently Minister Stephen Donnelly, he announced a new clinical trials oversight group, which is very exciting. This is a very positive step. And his aim is to double the amount of clinical trials that actually take place here in Ireland, which is going to be so impactful. At Pfizer, we would work very, very closely with Cancer Trials Ireland. We're proud supporters of their Just Ask Your Doctor campaign, which I know is very close to your heart, Patrick. And it's really encouraging patients to ask their doctors about new clinical trial opportunities that might be suitable for them. So I think, in summary, Ireland is a remarkable place to do clinical research, and we all need to partner together to make this happen.
I think in addition, another barrier is a lack of awareness among patients about clinical trials. So there's a misunderstanding about what a clinical trial is, the feeling that you might be the first person to ever receive this drug, and that's not the case. You wouldn't be receiving medication until it's gone through a lot of detailed investigation and research. So it is a safe process. And certainly from my experience, at no time are you handled in the clinical trial process. You're very much part of that process, part of the team. Your experience is very, very important to how successful the trial can be. So I'd encourage patients to make themselves aware of what clinical trials are, how safe they are, and how beneficial they could be to them rather than standard therapies like chemotherapy.
That's so true, Patrick. And it actually brings me nicely onto my next question. So could you talk to us a little bit about why you became involved in patient advocacy? What were your reasons?
I suppose that there's quite multifaceted reasons for that. One was, I suppose, I spent 5 years on a clinical trial. Right. And as I said, I was heavily involved. I felt very much part of the team process. Felt like I gave something towards the trial process. And was very proud of the fact that at the end of it, when the drug got its worldwide license, I felt that I'd done something to help other people as much as helping myself. But then when the trial was over, all that experience didn't have anywhere to go. So I felt that would be a loss. So I was looking for somewhere to leverage that experience when the Just Ask campaign came along and decided to get involved in that. The second piece, I suppose, as well, because of my own experience of how I arrived on the trial, the fact that it wasn't part of a process whereby trials would be discussed with patients as a treatment option along with frontline therapies. And I felt that should be the way to go. So the reason I work with my fellow advocates is to try and ensure that clinical trials will become part of the diagnostic process and that trials will be discussed as a viable option for all patients.
It's so important. And what do you think about the way clinical trials are introduced and communicated to patients at the moment?
Certainly from my own experience and then from the wider group that I deal with, there's probably a little bit too much hit and miss in the process. So it can depend on what treatment centre you're going to be attending or which clinician you're allocated to as to how much information you receive. Even if you do have a clinician who is interested in clinical trials, at times there isn't a lot of documentation that they can give you. So a lot of what you receive is a verbal update. I would encourage patients to do their own research as well. Now, be careful where you go on the internet looking for information. Only go to reputable sources. But it may be a case, as in my circumstances, that the trial had already started somewhere else. So it had been going for 2 years in America before it came here to Ireland. So you can look at the results of the American trial and see how they're getting on. So there will be information, factual data that you can base your decision on. So I'd encourage people to do that. Do as much research as you can, talk to as many people. Don't be scared of the process, because it could be a very, very positive outcome for you. With the way therapies are going now, the side effects of those therapies are a lot less invasive than chemotherapy, and therefore they may be a better option for you. Looking back at my own experience, I would have been better off going directly to the clinical trial than having done the chemotherapy. Unfortunately, it wasn't available at the time, but fortunately now there are many, many options available under the clinical trial process.
And this is exactly why campaigns such as Just Ask Your Doctor are so important for raising that awareness with patients.
And again, if your doctor doesn't have everything, they should be able to at least send you in the right direction, be that Cancer Trials Ireland or Cancer Society. There is information available. Or even just talking to other patients who have been involved. That's probably your best process because they can give you that one-to-one personal story. And hopefully that'll help allay anybody's fears. So why is the approval of new medicine so important?
Oh, it's a great question, Patrick. Well, as we were just discussing, we can see the innovation, we can see the progress that new medicines actually bring to patients. So that's fundamentally the bottom line. Access to new medicines, it's imperative to improving patient outcomes and improving the lives of patients of all diseases. But it's particularly apparent in the field of cancer. So we know, at Pfizer that breakthroughs can't save lives if patients can't access the medicines. We need to get these medicines to patients that need them. And, at Pfizer, we firmly believe that time is life. In recent years, we've seen a remarkable surge in oncology R&D from all corners of the globe. So huge progress has been made in cancer care over the last number of decades, and more people are actually surviving cancer than ever before. However, there are some issues. We have to acknowledge that. There are issues, and there is still a lot that we can do. It's true to say that cancer patients here in Ireland are facing longer delays in accessing medicines compared to patients in other countries. And how this works is, when a new drug is approved centrally through the European Medicines Agency, every individual country then must decide if that drug is to be reimbursed locally or not. So an economic evaluation must take place. And here in Ireland, there are still a number of steps that, industry must go through to actually succeed in getting their new drug reimbursed. And unfortunately, this process is taking longer than we would like. And this is, very, very unacceptable. It's frustrating. It's very upsetting for Irish patients who may wish to access that drug. And it's also, very, very challenging for Irish clinicians who may wish to prescribe that drug for their patients, and it's not yet available. However, on the positive, progress is being made here. All the stakeholders are working closely together to improve the process. So hopefully, that the process will improve and get quicker because patients are waiting.
Yes, very true.
So Patrick, I'm really curious to understand, how has the successful treatment benefited you, your life, your work, your family? Could you talk to me about that?
Yeah, certainly. One of the biggest impacts of treatment was because of the failure of my immune system, and because it took a certain amount of time for the clinical trial to work. I spent 5 years out of work. I didn't really have a job. I had a career. I'd put a lot of time invested into it when I got to a senior level in my company. So when the diagnosis came along, that obviously took all that away. And while you don't want to be defined by your job or what you do, it is a large part of it. But I have to admit, the diagnosis and the treatment gave me perspective that, that wasn't everything. In 2017, after 5 years of treatment, I did get to return to work. That had to be done on a gradual basis in order to reintroduce me. And when I made the decision after 8 or 9 months that I would only return part-time, that I wouldn't return full-time because, again, I wanted to have time then with my family. Not that I was ignoring them when I was healthy, but at the same time, you wanted to invest more time into your family and your friends. So the whole idea of celebration, events, birthdays, holidays do take on more of an onus. You want to enjoy those experiences. And I used to call it making M&Ms, making memories. And that's an important thing, like for me and then for my children, my wife and my family and friends. So yeah, that became the focus about having a more balanced life, which there's good learning in that for all of us, I think.
Fantastic, for sure. Patrick, what memories stand out for you that perhaps wouldn't have been possible without participation in your clinical trial?
I thought there are a couple. Interestingly, one start here, there's a nice picture of us. We went for a walk in the mountains. That was partly because we needed to stay away from people because I had no active immune system. But at that stage, at least, I had been through the worst of the treatment and could get out and about with the family. So it was nice to be able to get out and enjoy the air. But again, it was in a restricted sense.
Where was that? That looks absolutely beautiful.
That's somewhere down in Wicklow. Where exactly, I'm not too sure.
It's fabulous.
Yeah, because it is a beautiful waterfall and the kids did enjoy it.
They're up the top there, aren't they?
They're up the top, yeah. We went for a long hike. So, but again, it was great to have the energy, getting over fatigue, to be able to do that. The next then was our addition to the family. So
cute.
My wife would be horrified by the idea of getting a dog. But because I was at home on my own during the second year of treatment, she felt I needed company. So we got Millie. So Millie is a Malchi cross. Tiny little thing, but she's an absolute dote and was a great addition to the family, great for the kids. So we've had her now for 10 years.
Wow.
So that's something we wouldn't have done if I hadn't have been at home. So that was a brilliant addition. And then I suppose some of the other ones are, they're like life events. I suppose you don't want to be dramatic, but the initial prognosis was even if the chemotherapy had worked, I probably would have got 6 to 7 years of remission. And then the leukemia would have come back. And there wasn't really anything else after that. It doesn't respond to second-line chemotherapy. So again, you're looking at that whole transplant piece. So because the trial came along and it was the targeted medication you mentioned, because it was specific to my disease type, I was able to, for example, this is my daughter's Debs. So I was healthy enough to be at my daughter's Debs and we were able to host a pre-party before they went off to do God knows what, I don't want to know.
She's beautiful.
Yeah, she looks fabulous there. Yeah.
Wow.
So we all look very well, so that was one of those life moments I got to see because you worry when you are diagnosed, will you get to see these things? Will you get to see initially I'd hoped if I could get them through school.
I know.
Get them to 18 or 19 and now they're in their 20s.
It's remarkable.
And I've no intention of going anywhere.
It's remarkable.
Yeah. And then the last one then would be, this is all my nephews and nieces and my own children. And again, the fact that you can have everybody back in the house, whereas before it was make an appointment, see how Patrick feels. Even during COVID, do a test to make sure you're negative. So all that's gone away now and we're back to pretty much what I would call a normal life. Yeah. And I'm very grateful for that.
What are your plans now that you've retired recently?
Well, it won't be sedentary. It'll be an active retirement. So I'm still committed to the advocacy role. Still work to be done. I certainly want to get the message across to both clinicians and to cancer patients about the benefits of clinical trials. So I'll continue with that work. I might do a little bit of consultancy. And I was advised to do what was called a 60 at 60, where you generate 60 ideas of things you can do in your 60s. So I've done that. That's a bit of a struggle, but you can get there in the end. So some are quite ordinary and then some are a little bit of a stretch. So the one I'm working on at the minute is I'd like to play music live to a paying audience.
Wow.
Maybe some kind of benefit or something. Now, I am the world's guitarist, so I have to work at that a wee bit. But yeah, the idea is to try and stretch yourself, do things that maybe you wouldn't do normally. And again, that's a little bit of the outcome of being a cancer patient. You know, the idea that, you know, nothing's impossible now. You should grasp the moment while you can. Yeah. Don't take anything for granted.
So thank you so much, Patrick, for sharing. I mean, it's just remarkable to see the impact that a clinical trial has had on your life, and seeing these beautiful photographs and your plans, your exciting plans for the future. And I guess from my perspective, you know, working at Pfizer, it's a privilege for me to sit here with you and to hear your story, because, you know, when a new drug, a novel therapy is handed over to us in medical, it's handed over from our research and development team. Sometimes the medicine doesn't even have a name at that point. It's just a code. And, you know, you see the medicine develop, you see it go through clinical trials. If you're lucky, you see the data roll out at the end of it, and it's positive. And, you know, sometimes you see the new data being presented to the clinical community, and you share in that excitement, but you never really see the impact on a patient such as yourself. So it's really wonderful to share in your story today, play a small part in your journey. And just thank you again for sharing. It's great to see the progress and the innovation and the hope that, you know, novel therapies offer to patients. So again, thank you so much for sharing. Thanks for listening to the Innovate for Life podcast. If you found this episode interesting, please share and look out for other episodes in our Life Because of New Medicine series. Thank you.